Ever feel like, your own brain is working against you? Like those big changes you want to make, they just aren't happening no matter what you do.
It's like we're fighting some invisible force, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what? That invisible force might just be your own thinking.
Ooh, I like that.
So today we're diving into a book that's all about rewiring that thinking so real change is actually possible. We're talking about Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray.
Great book. Such a good one. It's amazing how much our beliefs really do shape our entire experience of the world. Like those beliefs are filters on a camera lens or something.
And often we don't even realize those filters are there,
Right.
which is why Gray starts with this great analogy of the blind man and the elephant. You know that one, right?
Oh, yeah, classic.
It perfectly illustrates how our individual experiences, those little slivers of reality we encounter, can lead to some very limited and sometimes totally wrong beliefs about the world.
It's true. And you know what's so interesting to me? It's not even just about being blind to the full picture. It's about how those little snippets of experience we do have, they become like this foundation for these huge, often unquestioned beliefs.
That's a great point. And it made me think about, how differently people can interpret the exact same news story. Their pre-existing beliefs, they color their entire perception of what happened.
Totally. It's like we're all seeing the world through these tinted glasses.
Exactly. So how do these beliefs even form in the first place? It feels like they're just there in our minds.
Well, Gray breaks it down with this thing he calls the pyramid of belief. And I think it's helpful to actually visualize a pyramid when you're trying to understand this.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So at the very, very bottom of this pyramid, that's actual reality. The whole shebang, all vast and unknowable.
Okay, the ground truth.
Right. But then above that is this tiny little platform, and that, my friend, is your personal experience. It's that tiny sliver of reality you've actually encountered in your life.
So we're already working with a limited data set from the get-go.
Exactly, we are. But then it gets even more narrow because on top of that tiny platform of experience is an even smaller platform, and that is your attention. It's that teeny tiny fraction of experience you're actually focusing on. Because let's be real, we are bombarded with information every second of every day, right? But we only consciously process a tiny fraction of it.
Right. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. You're only going to catch a few drops.
Exactly. And those drops, that's what we use to build the next level of the pyramid, which is your theories and judgments.
Okay, I'm following. So based on that little bit of information we've managed to catch, we start to create these ideas about how things work.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Like you might form a theory that, oh, I don't know, that all grocery stores sell milk because in your experience, every grocery store you've ever been to has had milk, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a pretty solid theory. I'd be pretty shocked if my grocery store suddenly stopped selling milk.
Right. And that's the thing. These theories, these judgments, they usually serve us pretty well. They help us navigate the world effectively. But sometimes those theories are just plain wrong or they're outdated and they can lead us so far astray if we're not careful. And at the very tippy top of this pyramid, built on that very shaky foundation,
Don't tell me.
that is where your beliefs live.
So our beliefs, those things we hold to be true, they're built on what? A bunch of selectively processed experiences.
You got it. And here's where it gets even more interesting. We tend to hang out with people who have similar experiences to our own.
They're birds of a feather and all that.
Exactly. So we're constantly reinforcing each other's beliefs, making them feel even more rock solid and unquestionable, even if they're based on a very limited and potentially flawed understanding of reality.
It's like we're all living in our own little snow globes of reality.
Yes. Our own little snow globes.
But I imagine those snow globes sometimes collide, especially when we're dealing with people who have very different beliefs than our own.
You got it. And that's where things get really interesting, really messy, sometimes really wonderful. And that's where Dave Gray's next point comes in. He tells this great story about a dog named Spitfire. This story, it beautifully illustrates how our beliefs, they don't just shape our reality, they shape our interactions with others.
Okay, a dog story. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Tell me more about Spitfire.
So Spitfire, he was this rescue dog, bit of a rough past, And one New Year's Eve, Gray and his family, they're giving Spitfire this big bone as a treat, right? Figured he'd be thrilled.
Makes sense. Who doesn't love a good bone?
Right. But here's the thing. Instead of being all happy and grateful, Spitfire, he becomes really possessive of this bone. And he actually ends up biting Gray's son.
Oh, no. Poor pup. I bet he was just scared, operating from this place of fear and protection.
Exactly. That's precisely it. You see, Spitfire, He had this belief, this story he was telling himself based on his past experiences, that maybe this bone was going to be taken away. But in this loving home, that story, that belief, it wasn't serving him.
It was creating more problems than it was solving.
Exactly. And it actually created what Gray calls a negative story web. It's like this whole system of beliefs and behaviors that lead to stress and conflict for everyone involved.
Story webs.
Yeah.
I like that. It's such a great visual, right? Because it's not just about one isolated belief. It's about how those beliefs connect, how they influence the way we interact with others, and ultimately how they shape the reality we experience together.
Exactly. And it's not just dog-human relationships either. This applies to all kinds of relationships. Think about those arguments you have with loved ones, the ones that seem to go nowhere no matter how many times you have them.
Oh, yeah. Been there.
Those are usually fueled by clashing story webs,
Yeah.
where each person's beliefs create these wildly different interpretations of the same situation.
It's like we're speaking different languages, even when we're using the same words.
It's so true. It's like those frustrating doom loops we can get stuck in. You know those, right?
Totally. You're going round and round, but you're not actually getting anywhere.
Exactly. But the good news is there's a way out. And thankfully, in Gray's story with Spitfire, they were able to escape that doom loop.
Oh, good. I was worried about Spitfire. Did they find a way to help him feel safe and secure?
They did. They found this amazing dog trainer, and she helped them understand, Spitfire's needs, his triggers, and she helped them create a new story, a more positive one, a more accurate one. So instead of labeling Spitfire as a problem dog, which only reinforced his negative behaviors.
They started seeing him as a good dog who just needed a little extra love and understanding.
Exactly. They chose to believe that he was capable of learning new behaviors, of being a loving member of the family.
And by shifting their own beliefs, they were actually able to change Spitfire's behavior.
Precisely. It's a powerful example of how we can escape those negative doom loops, those self-fulfilling prophecies, by, first and foremost, challenging our own assumptions about others.
I love that. It's so easy to get stuck in those patterns, to assume we know what's going on in someone else's head.
Absolutely. We all do it. But it's in those moments of questioning, of really trying to understand another perspective, that true transformation can happen. And, this whole idea of challenging assumptions, it's not just about our beliefs about other people.
It's about the beliefs we hold about ourselves, too.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because those deeply ingrained beliefs we have about ourselves, the ones that tell us who we are, what we're capable of, those are the ones that can really hold us back from our full potential.
It's like we create these invisible ceilings for ourselves, these limitations that might not even be real.
Exactly. And Gray, he tells this story about himself, how for years he believed he needed a master's degree to teach, at a university level. And that belief, it kept him stuck.
Because he didn't think he was good enough without that piece of paper.
Exactly. But then one day, he just decides to question that belief.
It's like, what if I'm wrong?
Exactly. And guess what? The moment he lets go of that limiting belief, suddenly all these opportunities start popping up everywhere. He starts getting invited to teach workshops, to give guest lectures, all this stuff he never thought was possible before.
It's amazing how that works, right?
Oh.
The moment you shift your thinking, suddenly the whole world seems to shift around you.
It's wild. It's like you're wearing these blinders and then suddenly someone takes them off and you're like, whoa, there's a whole world out there I couldn't even see before.
It reminds me of this time I was convinced I needed a fancy suit to land this big job interview I had. I thought I had to look the part to get the part.
Oh, I feel that. I've totally been there.
Right. But then I talked to a friend who worked at the company, and she was like, dude, just be yourself. They care more about your skills and experience than what you're wearing.
What did you do?
I ditched the suit, went in there feeling comfortable, confident, and you know what? I got the job.
No way. That's incredible.
It was such a good reminder that sometimes those limiting beliefs, they're just that, beliefs. They're not necessarily true.
Absolutely. And they can really limit our options. They create these artificial constraints that keep us from even seeing possibilities that might be right in front of us.
It's like we're walking around with blinders on, only able to see what our beliefs allow us to see. And anything outside of that, it's just invisible.
Exactly. And this doesn't just happen to individuals, it happens to companies too. Gray even uses Nokia, the once dominant mobile phone company, as an example of this.
Oh, wow, Nokia, what happened there?
They completely missed the boat on the smartphone revolution. They dismiss the threat of the iPhone because of this deeply held belief in their own superiority.
Oh no, they were so convinced they were at the top of their game, they didn't see the change coming.
Exactly. And it costs them big time. It's a prime example of what Gray calls self-sealing logic in action. It's this fascinating protective mechanism our brains have where we literally distort or even completely dismiss information that doesn't fit with our existing beliefs.
Wow. Our own brains working against us. So how do we break free?
That is the million-dollar question, right? And thankfully, that's what the practical side of liminal thinking is all about. It gives us tools to start questioning those beliefs, to start reshaping them, and ultimately to start creating a reality that's more aligned with who we truly are and what we truly want.
Okay, I am ready to break free. So
Yeah.
tell me, how do we do it? How do we actually put liminal thinking into practice?
Well, it all starts with awareness, right? Like step one is just noticing those limiting beliefs, bringing them into the light of day so we can actually start to work with them.
Okay, makes sense. But how do we do that? How do we uncover those beliefs that are so deeply ingrained we don't even realize they're there?
That is the question, isn't it? And Gray, he's got a whole bunch of practical techniques, or what he calls practices, that we can use to start shifting our thinking. And the first one is all about acknowledging our own biases. You're ready for this?
Hit me with it.
Practice number one is assume you are not objective.
Ouch. Okay, that's a tough one to swallow.
It is. It's humbling, right? But it's also incredibly freeing because it allows us to approach situations with a little more curiosity, a little less judgment, especially when it comes to those things we're really emotionally invested in. You know those things, right? The ones where buttons get pushed and we just can't seem to see straight.
Oh yeah, I know those buttons well.
We all do. But here's the thing. When we're in that emotionally charged state, we're often blind to our own contributions to the problem.
So it's not just that the other person is being difficult, it's that we're bringing our own baggage to the situation.
Exactly. And that baggage, it's often filled with unexamined beliefs and assumptions.
Okay, so how do we unpack that baggage?
Well, one powerful tool Gray suggests is something called the Johari window. Have you heard of this?
I think so, but remind me.
So it's basically this exercise you can do with a trusted friend or colleague where you ask for feedback on your communication style, how you show up in different situations. And it can be really eye-opening because it reveals those blind spots, those things that we're completely unaware of, but that might be impacting our interactions with others.
Oh, wow, that's a great idea. I'm gonna have to try that. But what about actually shifting those limiting beliefs? Once we've identified them, how do we do that?
Well, that's where the real work begins. And practice two is a great place to start. It's called empty your cup.
Empty my cup. What does that even mean?
It's a metaphor, right? Think about it. If you're holding on to a cup that's already full, how can you possibly pour anything new into it?
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Right. So emptying your cup is about approaching situations with fresh eyes, with a beginner's mind. It's about suspending judgment, quieting that inner critic, and really truly listening to what other people are saying, especially those who hold different views than our own.
So it's about being open to new possibilities, new perspectives, even if they challenge our existing beliefs.
Exactly. Because here's the thing. Our beliefs, they're not fixed. They can change. But only if we're willing to let go of what we think we know and be open to something different.
And that's a great point. It's so easy to get stuck in our own heads and our own ways of seeing the world.
It really is. And that's why creating a safe space for those conversations to happen is so important. And that actually brings us to practice three, which is create safe space.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we create a space where people feel comfortable sharing their honest thoughts and feelings, especially when those thoughts and feelings might be different from our own?
Well, it starts with being mindful of our own energy, like, are we coming from a place of curiosity or are we coming from a place of judgment?
Because nobody wants to feel judged, right?
Yeah.
Especially when they're being vulnerable and sharing something that's important to them.
Exactly. And, it doesn't have to be this big formal thing, this creation of a safe space. Sometimes it's the smallest gestures that make the biggest difference. Gray, he talks about this guy, Chris Ortiz. He was a business analyst at this company, and he completely transformed the culture of his team just by, making his workspace more inviting.
What did he do? Put beanbag chairs everywhere and offer everyone kombucha.
Well, I don't know about the beanbag chairs, but he did start offering everyone tea. He'd brew up a big pot of tea every morning and invite his colleagues to come hang out, chat, share ideas.
And just that simple act of hospitality created a space where people felt more comfortable opening up.
Exactly. They felt heard, they felt seen, and it completely changed the dynamic of the team. They went from being this group of individuals kind of all doing their own thing to being a cohesive unit, working together towards a common goal. And you know what else Gray talks about, which I think is really fascinating?
Tell me, tell me.
The SCAR-F model. It's this model of social interaction that identifies 5 key domains that drive our behavior in social situations.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. What are these 5 domains?
So it's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And the idea is that when those needs are met, when we feel like we have a sense of status within a group, when we feel certain about what's expected of us, when we feel like we have some autonomy over our own work, when we feel connected to others, and when we feel like we're being treated fairly, we're much more likely to thrive.
It's like a recipe for psychological safety, right?
Exactly. And when we feel safe, we're much more likely to let our guard down, to be vulnerable, to share our ideas and perspectives freely. And, speaking of perspectives, that reminds me of another liminal thinking practice that's all about gaining a more well-rounded view of a situation.
Oh, yeah. Which one is that?
It's called triangulation.
Triangulation. I feel like I've heard of this, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Refresh my memory.
So it's basically the idea that to truly understand something complex, you need to look at it from multiple perspectives.
Because everyone has their own biases, right? Their own limited view of reality.
Exactly. And when we only see things from our own point of view, we're missing out on a whole lot of information.
So how do we actually put triangulation into practice? Do we, call up our nemesis and ask for their opinion?
Well, it doesn't have to be that dramatic. But it does require us to be open to perspectives that are different from our own, even those that might initially make us feel uncomfortable.
Okay, so give me an example. How has triangulation actually worked in, the real world?
Well, Gray tells this fascinating story about a military strategist in Iraq who was struggling to understand the complex dynamics of the conflict there. He'd been looking at maps, studying the terrain, analyzing troop movements, all that stuff.
Making sense of the situation from a strategic military point of view.
Exactly. But he was still missing something, so he decides to try something different.
What did he do?
He got his hands on a tribal map of the region.
A tribal map, showing the different tribes and their territories.
Exactly. And when he overlaid that tribal map with the political map he'd been using, it completely changed his understanding of the situation. Suddenly, he could see these hidden connections, these alliances and rivalries that were completely invisible before.
Wow. So he literally changed his perspective, and it completely transformed his understanding of the problem.
Exactly. And it allowed him to develop much more effective strategies for navigating that complex landscape.
Okay, that is powerful. I'm starting to see how these liminal thinking practices can really help us see things in a whole new light.
They really can. And sometimes those new insights come from the simplest of actions.
Like what?
Like asking questions.
Asking questions. Yeah, that's it.
It sounds simple, right? But you'd be amazed how often we forget to do it. We get so caught up in our own heads and our own assumptions that we forget to actually ask the people around us what they think, what they need, what they're experiencing.
It's like we assume we already have all the answers.
Exactly. And Gray, he talks about this guy, Mitch Sippis, who's made a career out of asking questions.
What do you mean? Like he's a professional interviewer or something?
Kind of. He travels the world and he sits down with people from all walks of life and he asks them these incredibly simple yet profound questions about their lives. Like, what are you most proud of? What are your biggest hopes and dreams? What keeps you up at night?
He's like a belief detective, uncovering the hidden stories that shape people's lives.
Exactly. And by really listening to those stories, by understanding the needs and desires that are driving people's actions, he's able to help them identify opportunities for growth and transformation.
I love that. It's about seeing potential where others might see obstacles. And sometimes those obstacles, they feel so ingrained, so habitual. Like we're stuck on a hamster wheel, running and running, but not actually getting anywhere.
It's the worst, right? But here's the good news. Those patterns, those habits, they're not set in stone. And sometimes all it takes to break free is a little bit of disruption.
Disruption, huh? Like what kind of disruption are we talking about here? Should I dye my hair pink or something?
Well, it doesn't have to be that drastic, but Gray, he does argue that sometimes shaking up our routines, even in small ways, can help us see things from a fresh perspective.
So if I'm stuck in a rut, the answer is to, intentionally disrupt my routine.
Exactly. He tells this great story about a family therapist who used this principle to help a couple who was having a lot of conflict with their teenage son. They were stuck in this power struggle, constant arguments, lots of tension.
Been there.
Right. It's the worst. But the therapist, she gave them this really unusual assignment.
What was it?
She told them that for 1 week, they had to do something completely unexpected with their son every single day. Like instead of nagging him to clean his room, they might surprise him with his favorite meal or take him to a movie he'd been wanting to see.
So they had to break the pattern, disrupt the usual dynamic.
Exactly. And at first, the parents were understandably a little hesitant. They were like, wait, you want us to reward our son for bad behavior. But the therapist explained that it wasn't about rewarding bad behavior. It was about creating a new dynamic, a new story where connection and joy could flourish.
And did it work?
It did. It wasn't an overnight fix, but by intentionally disrupting their routine, by doing the unexpected, they were able to break free from that negative pattern and actually start to enjoy spending time together again. And Gray, he also talks about how this principle of disruption, it doesn't just apply to our personal lives. It can be really powerful in a work context, too.
Okay, give me an example.
So he tells this story about this company, Hunter Industries, that completely transformed their approach to software development just by making a small, seemingly insignificant change to their meeting structure.
Okay, I am intrigued. What did they do?
They decided to experiment with something called mob programming. Have you heard of this?
Mob programming. No, that sounds kind of intense.
It does, doesn't it? But it's actually pretty cool. Basically, instead of having each developer work on their own little piece of code independently, the whole team works together on the same code at the same time in the same room.
Wait, the whole team? Isn't that like a recipe for chaos?
You'd think so, right? But actually, it turned out to have all these amazing benefits. Because they were all working together, they caught errors more quickly, they were able to share knowledge more easily, and they were able to get things done much faster.
Wow. That's incredible. So by simply changing the way they work together, they were able to dramatically improve their results.
Exactly. And, it all came down to being willing to try something new, to disrupt their old way of doing things, even if it felt a little uncomfortable at first.
Okay, that is really inspiring. But I have to ask, what about those really deep-seated beliefs? The ones that feel almost impossible to change. Like, what if I believe I'm just not good at something, or that I'm not worthy of love, or that I'll never be successful? How do we even begin to tackle those kinds of beliefs?
Those are the tough ones, right? But they're not insurmountable. And Gray's got a practice for that, too. It's called act as if in the here and now.
Act as if. You mean like fake it till you make it?
It's a little more nuanced than that. It's not about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about choosing to behave in a way that's consistent with the beliefs you want to have, even if you don't fully believe them yet.
So if I'm terrified of public speaking, but I want to be a more confident speaker, I should just, start acting as if I'm the next Oprah.
Exactly. Well, maybe not Oprah right away, but you could start small. Like volunteer to present at your next team meeting or offer to give a toast at a friend's birthday party. The idea is that by acting as if those new beliefs are already true, we start to gather real-world evidence that can either support or refute those old limiting beliefs.
And it's such a cool concept because we're constantly collecting data, right? Every experience we have either reinforces our existing beliefs or challenges them. So why not be intentional about the kind of data we're feeding ourselves?
Exactly. And the more we act in alignment with those new, empowering beliefs, the more those beliefs become our reality.
It's like we're literally rewiring our brains, creating new neural pathways based on the actions we take and the choices we make.
Exactly. And that's the power of this practice. It's not just about thinking our way into new beliefs, it's about acting our way into them.
I love that. It's about embodying the change we want to see. And, that makes me think about the power of stories, which is actually Gray's next practice. Makes sense with stories. Because stories, they're not just entertainment, right? They're how we make sense of the world, how we share our beliefs, how we connect with each other on a deeper level.
Absolutely. And they have this incredible ability to bypass our logical defenses and speak directly to our hearts.
It's true. There's a reason we're drawn to movies and books, even just sharing anecdotes with a friend. Stories have this unique power to transport us, to make us feel things, to help us see the world in a whole new light.
It's amazing, right? And scientists have actually discovered that when we hear a story that resonates with us, our brains literally sync up with the storyteller's brain.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah, it's this phenomenon called neural coupling. And it basically means that we're experiencing the story as if it's happening to us.
So it's not just passive listening. It's like we're actively participating in the creation of the story.
Exactly. And that's why stories can be such powerful tools for change. Because when we hear a story that challenges our existing beliefs or opens us up to new possibilities, it's not just information, it's an experience.
It's like we're trying on a new pair of glasses and seeing the world through someone else's eyes.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly transformative.
So as we wrap up our exploration of liminal thinking, I think it's important to remember that it's not just about the individual practices themselves, right?
Mm,
It's about the underlying mindset, that willingness to be curious, to challenge our assumptions, to be open to new possibilities.
absolutely. And that brings us to Gray's final liminal thinking practice, which I think is a perfect note to end on. And that is evolve yourself.
Evolve yourself. I love that. So it's not just about changing our thinking, it's about changing our being.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing that we're not static, we're dynamic, we're constantly evolving, growing, changing. And the more we embrace that process of evolution, the more we step into our power as conscious creators of our own reality.
I love that. It's about becoming the authors of our own life stories, not
Yeah.
just the characters in someone else's narrative.
Yes, and that might mean evolving our roles at work or transforming our relationships or even just letting go of old habits and beliefs that are no longer serving us. It's about being brave enough to ask ourselves, who do I want to be? And then having the courage to go out and be that person.
Be the change.
Exactly. And, sometimes those changes, they start small. Gray, he tells the story about a team at Intuit, the company that makes TurboTax, who decided to go rogue and create a single license option for their software.
Wait, they went against company policy.
They did, because they saw a need that wasn't being met. Their customers were asking for a more affordable option, but the company was so focused on selling those big, expensive multi-license packages that they weren't listening.
So this team, they decided to take matters into their own hands.
They did. They knew it was a risk, but they also knew that it was the right thing to do for their customers.
And it paid off. Really.
It did. Their little experiment, it ended up being a huge success, and it eventually forced the company to rethink its whole approach to pricing and product development.
Wow. That's an incredible example of how even small acts of courage, of challenging the status quo, can have a ripple effect that creates massive change.
It really is. And the best part is you don't have to be a CEO or military strategist or even a rogue software developer to make a difference.
Mm.
We all have the power to change the world, one belief, one action, one conversation at a time.
So as we leave our listeners today, what's the one thing you hope they take away from our deep dive into liminal thinking?
That their beliefs, those stories they're telling themselves about who they are and what's possible, they're not set in stone. They can change. And when those beliefs change, everything changes.
So good. Pay attention to those stories, challenge the ones that aren't serving you, and embrace the ones that light you up. That's the power of liminal thinking. It's about becoming conscious creators of our own reality, both individually and collectively. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, keep those minds open and those beliefs flexible.